Hello my friends, and welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to have you joining me today. We're going to be doing part 2 of our front yard makeover. I want to start by saying I hope you can hear me. I have just been gradually losing my voice over the past 2 weeks or so. Change of the season, everything was in bloom for a little while, but hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. So today we're going to be working on the flower beds that Danny had built in my previous video. If you haven't seen that video, you can check that out in last week's Wednesday video. I'll have it linked for you down below. But first things first, Danny is just working on spreading out the fresh dirt that our builder had brought over for us. And he had to work really quickly because this was actually in between storms. We have been having so much beautiful rain and it's doing wonders for my front yard, but it took us a long time to get these things into the ground because every time we would go out to spread out the dirt or to plant, everything would be super wet and muddy. So we had to kind of work around the weather. You see my little tightrope acrobat right there. That's Ryan. He is my littlest, and he is definitely our shadow along with Charlie that you saw there. So this is a few days later. Everything is kind of dried up a little bit. The dirt was still super moist. In some places it was even a little bit muddy, but we were again working with the clock because it was in the evening and the sun was going down, but it's been so warm in the day that this is really the only time you can tolerate being, outside in the full sun. So you can see the beautiful golden hour sun coming through the trees. The way that our house sits, the sun sets in the front of our house and it's absolutely beautiful. So we're getting started by digging out the holes. Now we're going plant by plant, and one thing you're going to notice is that I'm not bringing in a bunch of fresh dirt. I don't have like a bag of dirt, and that's because everything that is on here, the top layer is fresh, and what's underneath is the regular ground dirt. And so what we're doing is when Danny digs up the hole, he's using the pickaxe because he's digging up the dirt from the bottom, which is the natural soil. It mixes in with that brand new dirt that we have, and the dirt is also fertilized. So that is how we are planting our plants today. Our top layer of soil is about 8 inches deep, and then, like I said, underneath is where the natural soil is. So if we didn't have all this fresh dirt, we would definitely need to bring in some fresh soil. But because we have all this fresh dirt, we're not using any additional, packaged soil. We're using this beautiful soil that our builder actually makes. It's pretty cool. I would equate it to if you're baking and you're using a sifter to sift together your flour and your other dry ingredients and to get out, any hard pieces. That's what he does with the dirt. So he'll come over, he'll grab a whole bunch of dirt from, one of the lots. We had a huge mound in the front of our yard, or in our front yard, and then he takes it over to this big giant sifter and he sifts it and all the rocks come out. Well, for the most part, all the big rocks. And then what you're left with is beautiful dirt. So that's what he's been bringing over to us. So when I say he makes dirt, I don't mean he makes dirt or soil, but what he does is he takes the dirt and he creates this beautiful soil and he mixes it with fertilizer. So it's really nutrient dense, and I am really thankful that he has been bringing us over loads, over the past few days. He just tells us every time, if you need more, let me know. And I really appreciate that. So Danny and I worked as a team to get this done. Like I said, we were working against the clock because it was a little after 7 when we got started. So we had fed the boys dinner, got everybody situated, and then we went outside to plant. The weather was perfect. It was about 75 degrees, maybe a little less, and just absolutely beautiful. The soil was nice and damp and wet from all of the rain we'd had the couple of days before. It was just absolutely beautiful. So what I have planted so far, I did a hosta at the beginning, and then that bush is a it's a boxwood, and it's a type that is deer resistant, and it spreads. I think it's called a true spreader. And so that means it's just going to spread wide instead of tall. So we'll need to keep it trimmed and keep it, manicured so that it fits in the space, because it's a pretty, tight space. We wanted more yard than flower bed, but that's no problem. Those are really easy to manicure and keep them how you like them. And then I added in that purple lavender, and now I am also adding in some white petunias. These are like what I have in the backyard in my flower boxes. And now Danny is digging another hole for another boxwood. So when you're planting, the general rule of thumb is that you do the hole about double the size of the container that your plant is in. So that's why you'll see we dig it a little bit wider. The other thing too is that some of our holes are not very deep. That's because Danny's bringing in dirt, because we wanted to raise them up so that they're level with the retaining wall that he had built. So if it looks like, well, you didn't dig that hole very deep, that's why. It's because we were bringing them up. And then as you'll see, he has a wheelbarrow full of dirt, and that's because we're adding more dirt to bring them up higher. So the other thing I know that there was discussion about in my previous video, two things. One was the way that we were laying our bricks. So it was mentioned that we should be laying the bricks opposite, like one facing forward, one facing backward, so that they interlock. And that is one way that you can do it. However, when you're building a retaining wall, the way that we have it here is how you're supposed to do it. And the dirt kind of fills in each space in between, and it becomes a little bit of a reinforcer. So that's why it is the way that it is, number one. Number two, it was mentioned that we should have some kind of barrier to block critters from going underneath our front porch, and totally agree. That is totally something that we want to do. We're just not sure what we want it to look like yet. Part of me wants to put some plywood and do like a really pretty faux brick. Part of me just wants to do some, lattice. Like I just don't know. So I am trying to decide what I want that to look like. So it is going to happen. We've also discussed just filling it with rock. There's a bunch of rock under there now, but we shall see. Right now we are planting an incredible Snowball Hydrangea. These are absolutely gorgeous. The blooms are huge and stunning, and I love them. It looks like the plant is falling apart, and that's because we had a huge rainstorm when I first bought this plant, and while it was still at the nursery, the leaves had fallen to the ground, but that's okay. So hydrangea is a shrub. It's a flowering shrub. It's going to spread and be wide, and there's going to be parts that lay on the ground, and that's perfectly fine. So this hydrangea is still okay. It just looks a little bit beat up because of the way it's kind of laying around. So what I need to do is get some stakes for it. That is the plan. I just didn't have any with me. So what I was doing was kind of like wrapping the ones on the ground around the ones that were standing, so that they didn't get buried as we were planting, but I wasn't going to leave it like that. And then we're trying to figure out our spacing. So most of the things that we got will spread. So for example, these hostas, they will fill out and they look like a beautiful bloom on the ground, and they're really great ground cover. There was also mentioned in my previous video about the fact that they like to be in part shade, which is totally true. And I considered that when I picked them for the house and for the front area here, because this area does get afternoon sun. However, I did a lot of research when I was picking plants, and every house around me, literally every house on my drive to work, has hostas in full sun. These are just so incredibly prominent out here where we live, and I think they're going to do okay. The other thing is, Once you get them in the ground, they're not permanent. So if I notice that they're getting some kind of burn or if they're getting too much sun, I can always move them. That's not a problem. We're also going to be using mulch to, protect the dirt and keep the moisture in. So I think they're going to be okay. So I'm putting in a hosta, and then I'm adding in another little white annual. Annual flowers or annual plants, they mean that you have to plant them every year. They only last for a year, but majority of what we have put in today is a perennial, which means it comes back the following year. So this lavender that I'm planting, oh my goodness, something was biting the bottom of my foot. Danny was helping me. But that lavender that I'm planting right now, that's a perennial, the boxwoods, the hostas, the hydrangeas, the catnip that's right there, the big purple bushy plant. Those are all perennials. They'll all come back in the spring. The boxwoods actually will never go dormant. Those are an evergreen. So those are an evergreen shrub. They'll stay green all year long. So just tossing in another annual here. But annuals are fun because, you can kind of change your color scheme up throughout the years. This year I went with white and purple and green. Those are the color scheme that I chose. And, I can always add color with those annuals every year. So now we're coming around the corner here. So when Danny built this flower bed, we built it to go around the corner and down towards our AC unit. And that's because eventually this yard will wrap around into our backyard. It all just kind of flows together. And so I wanted to keep the flower bed going all the way around the corner. Now in today's video, I don't have enough plants to finish off the side of the house. We hadn't fully decided what we wanted to do yet. And the other thing is we have to reroute the downspout. So if you notice by Danny's feet, we have a downspout right there. The one over on the other side has a French drain, which means it's routed underneath our house and goes to a drain in the back into the woods. However, this one didn't have that. And so we have to reroute it. And there are ways that you can do that. You can add pipe to it so that it, will turn and go the direction that you want. So Danny is going to do that today, actually. When I'm editing this, it's the morning after, partially why I sound like this, my morning voice. But he's going to reroute it so that way, it's not flooding this area. It really doesn't anyway. Most of the water goes to the other big downspout. This is just a smaller one, but I did just put in a dwarf limelight hydrangea right there. From this angle, it looks like it's right in front of the downspout. It's not. It is right above the downspout, so it won't get pummeled by all of that water. However, this catsnip that we're putting in right now, this will get a lot of water, so we have to make sure we reroute that. So we're going to do that today. The other thing is this catsnip may not live here forever. I think that my goal is to put something tall here. I'm going to bring in a shepherd's hook, I think, with a hanging flower pot for now to see if the height is what's needed. And if it is, I think I'm going to invest in a dogwood tree for right here, just a small dogwood tree. I think it needs, a bigger taller item in this area. So I think that's what we're going to do. If that's the case, that just means the catsnip will move. That's not a problem. But I do love this big bushy plant. It is a pollinating plant, so the bees during the day are all over this thing. In fact, when we were moving it, there was a big, beautiful furry bumblebee all over it. And I love that. I love that it brings, the bees and the pollinators. So that is the last plant that we're going to plant on this side of the house, and now it's time to go in with the mulch. Now we decided to go with black mulch. It felt like a no-brainer with the color scheme of our house. We've got a black roof, a white house, and it felt like the black mulch was appropriate. It also felt like it was going to make the colors pop, which is exactly what it did. And the lighting right now is so dreamy. The sunset was coming through the trees. Oh, it's just fantastic. Like I said, the way our house sits, the sun sets in the front of our house. Right now, you can't really see it because of the trees, but we can see the light filtering through, and it's just gorgeous. So Danny is going through and adding in the mulch, and then I follow him and spread it out and, fill it into all the little nooks and crannies. Now, again, as I mentioned, we are going to put some kind of barrier behind these plants to block off underneath our porch. So we did leave a little bit of space because we knew we were going to be putting something there. That's why it doesn't go like all the way back. If we weren't going to put something, I would have put the mulch all the way underneath the deck so it just looked nice and smooth, or the porch, I'm sorry. But because we're not sure what we're going to put there, I didn't want to push it all the way back. Mulch is really important because, like I said, it protects your dirt. It keeps it moist. It holds that in. So when the sun is down, beaming down onto your flower bed, the mulch is what's getting hot and dry, not the dirt underneath. And mulch is made, this mulch in particular, there's lots of different mulches, but the one that we have is made of cedar chips. It smells fantastic. I love it. It smells like the woods. And it is dyed. So just be mindful of that. It doesn't get on your clothing or things like that, but you don't want to leave these bags like on your walkway or your porch because the cedar is, dyed, and so it can put some color onto your areas, your porch or anything like that. So just be mindful if you buy bags of colored mulch. Our house in Vegas, we used red mulch or brown mulch. It was always really, really pretty, but here the black just felt so appropriate, and I am so glad we went with this choice because not only did it make the plants pop, but it also made those stones pop. It just looked absolutely gorgeous. And I also wanted to mention that little gardening mat that I'm kneeling on. I purchased that on Amazon. I'll have it for you linked in my Amazon shop, but it is so very helpful when you're up and down, up and down, up and down. My knees were killing me by the end of this. They were burning, they were tired, my legs were tired and sore, but this was tremendously helpful so I wasn't kneeling on rock or the stone. So it's a really good thing to have. I want to say I paid, somewhere around $15 for it, I think, but it was a really good investment. You can use it when you're weeding or planting or anything. So I'll have that for you, like I said, in my Amazon store. And we're just going to finish up spreading out this mulch, and then we're going to move to the other side of the porch where the big flower bed is. The other important step after you get all of your items planted is to water them. You want to give them a nice, good, thorough water. And you want to be really mindful when you're watering, not to do a ton of watering of the leaves of the plant. I was kind of rinsing them off right here because there was a bunch of mulch on them. But when you're watering your plants, you want to make sure that you are putting the water primarily at the root. You don't want to be, doing a whole lot of watering of the leaves. That's not how they, absorb water. So now we are moving on to the other side of the porch. Now this flower bed is oddly shaped and very large. When our builder poured our walkway, it created this section over here that is, like I said, really big and a little bit awkwardly shaped. It wasn't necessarily how I would have done it, but it got done, before we had a say, and I just felt like let's make the most of it instead of pulling up the cement walkway and starting over. So here we are. This is what we're doing. We're going to start by planting another of those incredible hydrangeas. These are beautiful. So the blooms are white. They're like a little yellowy, creamy white. As you can see here, this one has a bunch of big, beautiful blooms, and I am obsessed with this plant. They're expensive. That's why I only have 2. However, they are an investment. It's a perennial. They'll come back every year. They are a shrub, so they'll grow nice and big and bushy. That's why we're only putting 1, because it'll get really big. Our builder actually said he has several of them in his front yard, and he said, make sure you leave room all around that bad boy because it's going to get really big. And eventually, hopefully, it'll get big enough that we can split it and kind of divide them around the house. So that will be the plan in the future. But if it looks like things are a little bit bare, like we have space and we could fill things in, that's because we're making sure to leave room for everything to grow. And again, remember that the dirt that we have here has been fertilized. So if you're wondering why we're not putting in, plant food and things like that, that's because everything has already been fertilized. And in our boxwoods, we just purchased those. Those had actually just been fertilized. You can actually still see the plant food right on the top of them. So they are good to go. They've already been fed. These boxwoods are different. These are green velvet, and they are a little bit smaller. We wanted a smaller shrub over here just to kind of eventually create a little bit of, a visual hedge, not an actual hedge. I'm not interested in having anything like super manicured, but just a little bit of a hedge. So we're going in a little bit of a pattern. We're doing a hosta up in the front and then a boxwood in the back, and we're staggering them along the walkway. And when you're planting, you want to plant from the back to the front because you don't want to have to step over the plants that you've just planted to get to the ones in the back. So be mindful of that. That's why we started with the hydrangea, and then we're working our way to the front. And I've got these other really pretty white perennials that I'm putting in. And again, annuals. Again, every year I can change those up if I want to. I can do color if I want, but I'm really loving the white and the green. Again, we're using that same type of hosta that we used on the other side of the house. And as I mentioned, the green velvet boxwood. Those boxwoods will also remain green throughout the season. So that's the evergreen that we're having here. That's one of the things you want to keep in mind when you're planting any kind of garden like this. You want to have plants that are both, all year long and plants that are seasonal. So the hostas, those will, not be around in the winter, but they will sprout back up in the spring and they'll last through the fall, and then they will go dormant for the most part in the winter, but then they'll come back. It's so cool to watch them. They are such resilient little plants, and I have seen them grow in the most bizarre places where we live. And then I have the cutest little helper right there. He wanted to come plant. He's got his own little gloves. They were at Mimi's house today doing the vegetable garden, so they love to help plant. So, and like I said, I did not want to overcrowd this space because everything is going to get bigger, and I'm not exactly sure how it will look once it's all full. Once everything is at its max, like once everything grows to its biggest ability, then I can see where the spots are, the holes are, and I can fill them in. But I didn't want to overdo it, so that is what we're doing. I do have another dwarf limelight hydrangea right there in the front, and we're just going to kind of follow this pattern. Danny digs the hole, I plant the plant, and I'll show you how it all comes out in the end. After this, we'll add the mulch, we'll get it watered, and this really did transform the space. I love it. I know it's probably really hard to tell, but this dirt was so wet. It wasn't wet to the point where like there was water, coming out everywhere, but it was like packed in. Danny kept having to come in and kind of break up the dirt for me. We had to keep taking dirt out. We had so much dirt here, but he would kind of have to lift it up and kind of rake it with the shovel, if you will, because it was so wet from all of the rain that it was pretty packed in there. But that was good because when we plant these plants, you don't want them to dry out. Your plants in containers will always get drier faster. They'll always need more water because, the entire root is exposed in a container for the most part, right? Because it's not, yes, it's in dirt, but it's not in the ground. So it doesn't have that natural water in the dirt in the ground. So it's going to need water more. Where plants like this that are in the ground will have that natural water resource. It's very interesting. Before we had the grass seed, we would notice that during the day, the dirt would be really dry, but then when we would come out in the evening, as it would cool off and the sun wasn't directly on the dirt, the moisture would come out and the dirt would get darker. And there would be some mornings where it would look like it had actually rained when it totally did not. It was just the moisture in the air, the moisture in the dirt. So having the dirt be, this damp is fantastic for planting because I knew that they weren't going to get too dry when I put them in the ground. I do still end up watering them, but I didn't water them as much as I would if the ground was drier, if it hadn't just poured for an entire day. But the ground was really, really wet and it was damp. It was perfect. And hopefully these plants are feeling very happy in the ground. I don't know if you can tell in this video, but we are now really racing against the clock. The sun was really starting to set. It was almost 9 o'clock, and we were really thankful that the sun had stayed up as long as it did, but it was definitely getting darker. That's why my camera footage isn't as clear, and I'm sorry for this angle. I don't understand why it's a little crooked, but that hosta there in the front, we did end up digging it up and pushing it back a little bit so it kind of fills in that empty space there. But again, that dwarf limelight hydrangea will fill in, and so we didn't want to make it too full. And if you notice where Danny is standing, we left that space open. We may add something else back there, but we weren't sure how big that hydrangea was going to get, so we wanted to wait and see. And now it's time for some power mulching. We were moving so fast at this point. Our bodies were hurting. The sun was going down. It was 9 o'clock. I had worked this day. We were ready. Danny had been helping his parents move a bunch of stuff at their house. We were ready to just be done. We have been binge watching Yellowstone. We wanted hot showers and our couch and some binging. So we were working so fast right now. We're going to get this mulched, and then I can't wait for you to see the final product. Finally, it was time for some cleanup and a good watering to the plants. Again, in this part, you're going to see me doing a lot more watering of the actual plant, of the leaves and such. I wouldn't normally be watering the leaves and everything this much, but I was just getting off all of the dirt and the mulch, and everything just looked so pretty. I'm so glad we went with the color scheme that we did. Doesn't matter the season, we could toss in anything here. It would look super pretty. And I love it. I was making sure that I got all of the mulch wet as well, so it would hold the dampness on the dirt underneath. And this doesn't have any kind of drip system or sprinkler system, so I will have to come out here and water on days that it doesn't rain. But luckily in the summer, it rains a lot here, so everything will stay for the most part pretty moist. But you'll have to come back for next week's video to see me add in the rest of our lighting. I've got beautiful uplights, more solar lights. I can't wait for you to see that. But in the meantime, here is how it all turned out. It's absolutely gorgeous. I'm so glad we were finally able to get all of these plants into the ground, get everything mulched. And I love it. This is the next morning. This is this morning. I'm not sure if you can tell, but absolutely beautiful. So come back next week. We're going to get everything cleaned up, get all the dirt cleaned up, get all the lights put out, and I can't wait for you to see that final product. So if you enjoyed today's video, I would love for you to consider giving it a big thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed already, I would love to have you subscribe and come back for more. I post new videos every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a great day, my friends. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.